like to call the work session to order for May 15, 2023. City Clerk, please read the roll call.
Let the record reflect that Councilmember Stipp is not present this evening.
Thank you. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. I would like to remind council the staff will be pausing intermediately to answer any questions. Go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Mayor and Council.
Whoops. You got it?
There.
Yeah. All right.
All right, well, good
Okay,
evening.
go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Jenna Goad, the Assistant to the City Manager, and I'm here tonight seeking council on a potential partnership opportunity with Maricopa County. We were approached by the county about this opportunity to jointly fund a workforce development coordinator position at a new county facility that is going to be opening in Goodyear. Just to give you a little bit of background, there are currently workforce development coordinators at 8 different locations throughout the region in partnership with 8 other cities, including Mesa, Scottsdale, Surprise, and Tempe. Those are all indicated by the navy blue dots there on the map. There are also 2 larger one-stop centers that the county operates in Glendale and Mesa, and those would be the orange or reddish dots on the map there. Goodyear residents can currently access the workforce development services through the county at any of these locations, but of course the one in Avondale, that's just south of the I-10 there, would be the closest for our residents currently. The approximate location of the new facility is the purple or pink dot, which I'm going to show you a more detailed version on the next slide, but just wanted you to see how these positions are spread out throughout the region. There we go. The county recently purchased property in Goodyear to operate a health clinic and a Head Start early education program. The red outline there shows the location of the new facility on the north side of McDowell Road, west of Litchfield, at approximately 141st Avenue. I believe this was formerly the location of Trivium East Charter School before they moved to their location over here. It would also include the parcel that's immediately to the north of the one that I have highlighted, so it is both pieces, the front piece that is the larger building as well as that smaller kind of corner in the back. The county estimates that the Head Start program would open in August, but that the health clinic component would not open until the fall of next year, of '24. The county identified the Southwest Valley as an area where they wanted to expand, and having acquired this site, it offered the opportunity to place a workforce development coordinator here at the new facility in Goodyear. We feel that the residents of Goodyear could benefit from these services. They're a nice complement to what the city offers, and in addition to benefiting specifically from the workforce services, they could also benefit from the other programs that are on site, including the Head Start and the health clinic, which are also very complementary. The county is designated as the Arizona at Work workforce development provider for everyone in Maricopa County except residents of the city of Phoenix, but they serve everybody else. These programs are designed to help job seekers to access employment, education, training, and support to succeed in the labor market, and also to help match employers with the skilled workers that they need to be competitive. The workforce development coordinators can also work with employers if they know that there are going to be upcoming layoffs to help with transition planning and assistance for those employees who will be laid off. And so these are just some examples of the other services that workforce development provides. And I was able to get some data since July of 22, so in the last 10 months or so. They have served approximately 76 Goodyear residents, but that doesn't include anyone who participated in a service where they didn't have to enroll. So perhaps if someone just came into the office and got information, or they attended some sort of an event, it would be in addition to those. But for sure, at least 76 of our residents accessed the services via one of those other locations so far this year. So just to be a little bit more specific about the Workforce Development Coordinator itself, the Workforce Development Coordinator is the immediate access point for the public to use all of those services that I was just mentioning. This would be a partnership with the city in which the city and the county would share the cost of this position, but the person would be a county employee and the county would handle all of the administrative and personnel duties associated with that. In addition to working directly with the public, the Workforce Development Coordinator can also work and coordinate with city staff to plan and coordinate events like job fairs, education events, employer outreach, and other federally funded workforce development programs. And so, as I mentioned, staff did feel that this was a good complement to the services that the city offers and that it's in line with the goals in our Community and Neighborhood Services Master Plan. So we wanted to bring this opportunity to council so we could get your feedback. Just very briefly, I also want to mention having this position, this person can also then serve as a pipeline to other services that are offered by the county. So for example, senior services, adult services, the Smart Justice Service. They would of course be focused on workforce development, but as a county employee, they can serve as a pipeline to help our residents access all of these other services as well. I mentioned that we would be, the proposal is that we would be splitting the cost of the position. So it would be split 50-50. The city's cost would be approximately $53,000 per year. And we would want to do the agreement, the IJA with the county for 2 or 3 years so that the program has a chance to get up and running and established before we would look at whether or not we wanted to continue to do it. There are funds available in this year's city manager's discretionary funds to cover the cost for FY24. And then it would be funded as a one-time base expenditure in years 2 and 3. So if there is council consensus, if council is interested in moving forward with this, staff would work to develop an IGA with the county and then bring that forward for council's consideration at a voting meeting. And we estimate that the services could start in approximately August. And so with that, Mayor and Council, I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. We also have a representative from the county's Workforce Development Program who can answer questions as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Hampton.
No, thank you for bringing this to us. I had a couple questions on. I'll start with, I guess, the zoning. So you said the county purchased this land. Does it already meet all the criteria for that area, or are we going to see this come to us later for the health services and the daycare area there?
So my understanding is that they do not need to obtain any zoning changes or anything like that. They, of course, would need to follow any building safety or permits if they're doing tenant improvements.
Okay.
But no, not a zoning change.
Okay, I was just curious if we were going to see it come to us in the future. And then, do we know, are they taking over that entire in red area? Thought so.
Yeah, I believe it's 2 separate buildings. I can go back to that map. So I believe there's a larger building that's on closer to McDowell, and then there's, I think it's a playground and a field in the middle, and then a second building that's on the north side of the red line.
Oh, they have that one too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
So
yes.
they're
It would
taking
be,
over that whole area, everything except, I guess, the frontage.
yeah, I believe there's perhaps a medical office, if I'm not mistaken, right on McDowell, but then they would be everything to the north of that.
Okay. And then and that's Liberty, the neighbors to them are, looks like Liberty Water to the west? Is that correct? Okay. And then east is the office building. Okay. I'm just curious what that looks like. And there's a question, the neighbors, zoning. And this is specifically going to be for now, the scope is, and what we're talking about is the $54,000 for half a person to man the workforce development specific portion for us. And then they'll coordinate with us. We'll utilize them and for workforce development as general for the entire city potentially as well.
Yep.
Is that-
Mayor, Councilmember Hampton,
Summarize it?
yep,
Okay.
that's correct.
And then Okay, I think that's it for now. Yeah, no, I think if it's gonna be here and we can leverage their resources to help the city, then I think it'd be a good idea. So, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Jen. I think this will be a tremendous asset to the community. As you said, I think it'll be a complement to the services that we're providing, and certainly more detail. I'm really pleased that they offer several programs, not just a single function. They've served 76 Goodyear residents because it really hasn't been convenient to go elsewhere. But the question I have, will they also serve our local employers? Will they help our employers to secure the employees that they need?
Yes, Mayor and Vice Mayor Kano, yes, absolutely. They are available both to assist our residents in finding jobs and also to assist our employers to find the skill set and the workforce that they need. Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Well, I'm in support of this project. Thank you.
Councilmember Loretano?
I don't really have much more to add. I think it's a very good idea. It's a wise use of our funding to do that position with them. I do like the fact that they can also kind of be almost a navigator for some of the other services as well. I like the fact you said there were some senior services and other services that they can help our residents with. And I just think it's really important that we get the message out to our citizens that this will be really much closer and much more convenient for them to use. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people that, can use this, or employers, like the Vice Mayor was saying, that would be very helpful for. So I do support it, so thank you.
Councilmember Campbell? You're on.
Can you tell me what the health clinic is?
Oh.
And what is it?
Mayor and Councilmember Campbell, sorry, what was the second piece of that? Where is it, or what?
What is the health clinic?
I am going to have to phone a friend. Andrew from the county is here to help answer those questions. I don't have the details of exactly what type of services, other than that it would be a county health clinic. But
And I'm sorry, Mayor, council members, I don't have any specific information on what that clinic is going to be either. That's going to be run by the Department of Public Health through Maricopa County. So I don't have any specific information on that now.
Is it going to be a low-income health clinic? Is it going to be a clinic that's going to give out just immunizations? Is it going to be a clinic that is going to compete with our Mountain Park clinic that's next door to our old city hall?
Again, I'm not
You don't
100%
know.
sure on the services that we offer there, but I can go through our public health communications team and see if I can get some additional information.
I'd
and
like
get
to
that
know,
sent
I think
you.
that's important for us to know what type of health clinic you're going to be running in our city. If that's to complement what we already have for the low-income families that we have,
Absolutely,
or
Councilmember.
what? And then my other question is, the Head Start location, is that going to be specifically for Head Start children in Goodyear? Or do you know?
I believe our Head Start program is open to all communities, but it is based off a locality, so I think it would favor Goodyear residents
Goodyear, okay,
particularly.
because we send a lot of our folks over to the Avondale Resource Center, so if this is going to do what I'm hoping it will do, we won't need to support that resource center as much as we do this one, to get this one off the ground, because this will be actually in our city for our residents. And that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, Mayor, Councilmember, I can go back to, because that's actually internal to our department, so I
Okay.
can gather that information as well. and get it
Wonderful.
sent over to you.
And I know with the senior services and the weatherization, all of that is handled out of the resource center in Avondale for our residents that need that assistance. And if we can let them know we will be providing that out of our local office, I think that would be a win-win for them, because it'll be an easier location for them to get to.
Absolutely.
And I know we'll do workforce development in-house there. We'll have actual computers and things in-house that we will work with folks who are looking for a job, to teach them how to do a resume and to teach them how to look actually for a job.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really important, because so many of our folks have to go downtown, and it's really difficult to get there. So thank you for bringing it forward. I'm looking forward to hearing all about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
City Manager?
Yes, Mayor, I was just going to suggest that we gather more information and make sure all of council has we can answer the additional questions for Councilmember Campbell. He's asking when is the first phase opening?
The Head Start program is estimated to open in August for the start of this coming school year. But then the health clinic component was supposed to be the following year, fall of '24.
When does workforce start?
Workforce could start in August if council gives us, the green light to move forward.
Vice Mayor?
When you get clarification, can you explain whether or not this will actually be a resource center or if it's just additional services? Thank you.
Yeah. Mayor and Vice Mayor, just to that point very quickly, I do think that there are some services that could be accessed here instead of Avondale. It will not be a full resource center in the sense that there won't be other nonprofit partners there. In terms of senior services, there won't be congregate meals or activities. Or things of that nature. So certainly the workforce development piece they can help with, having the Head Start and the support services associated with that. But I don't want to characterize it as a complete replacement of what is offered in Avondale.
So we will also include what senior services you're going to be offering out of that. You're going to be working with Area Agency on Aging for the county, or what's going to, how is that going to be managed, and what are we going to be offering to the seniors out of that program?
Sure.
That's important.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gillis?
Just so I'm aware, this is in this year's budget? We planned on this?
This just came to us, and so a way to pay for what we need this year, it can come out of my contingency funds, and then it'll go into the base budget the next.
And that won't affect other contingency funds that we're saving for other things?
No, I haven't spent any of my contingency money and haven't been asked for any.
Okay, so this is was not in this budget then? That's my
No,
question.
no, they just came to us recently with this request.
Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. All I would ask is, after 6 months, if you could come back with a report on the money we invested in, what it resulted in. That's all. Okay, so we can compare the actual results of the program, so we can see what it produced. Okay? Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, thank you.
Second item is an update on the general plan. As they say on the show, come on down. Go ahead and would you both introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Steve Correcchia, Planning Manager. We're really pleased to bring this update to you on the General Plan 2035. A lot of work has gone into this since we started in January of '22. With me tonight is Matt Kleisico with Michael Baker, the consultant working with us on the General Plan. Matt and his team have been doing a lot of that work, the bulk of the work associated with getting out to the public, meeting with our citizens, and he has a great presentation that he has for you tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for that excellent intro. And Mayor, Council, thanks for the opportunity this afternoon to talk about our progress on the general plan. With that, excuse me, with that great intro, I just wanted to touch on my 3 primary talking points. So for our conversation, we're going to give a little bit of an update on process and progress, where we are in the overall effort. Then naturally, we'll want to talk a little bit about what we've heard from the community and how we've reached out to them. And then we'll close on just what we are working towards with that feedback and how we incorporated it into the general plan itself. So if you've participated in some of our efforts up to this date, this graphic might look familiar to you. Don't worry, I'm not going to read every line on this slide for you, but what it captures is an infographic that basically summarizes the primary phases of the overall work effort that focus on our recognize, enrich, and achieve. The big takeaway here, though, is to also see that engagement, a 4th phase, is intertwined throughout this whole process. And so while each phase of the process has multiple tasks that we're happy to answer any questions on, I think the takeaway with this graphic would be, as Steve mentioned, we kicked off this effort back in January of 2022, and now you can see with the green arrow close to the July 2023 timeline, we're getting close to that end of that enrich phase, where we're going to be, at the beginning of June, pushing out the 60-day review draft. That is the state-mandated complete draft of the general plan, to send that out to the public, adjacent communities, statewide agencies, and let that plan, as I like to say, marinate out in public and get any feedback from them through that process. Because at the end of that 2-month review process, we then move into that achieve phase where we start to make final refinements to the plan and then bring it back before you through additional work sessions and ultimately through 2 planning commission public hearings and 1 council hearing for final adoption. However, that final adoption, the process doesn't end. As we all know, with the general plan, we actually put that plan out to the public for a final voter ratification. So one of the key takeaways here is state legislature recently changed the law relative to calling for the election. And when we're looking at doing a special election, which we are looking at doing a voter ratification election for that May 2024 ballot, we have to have or call the election 180 days before that time frame. So that really plays into this overall timeline. We're sitting here today in almost exactly a year away from that, but much of that time is going to be in this 100-day noticing period, along with this 2-month period where we're going to put the plan out and let the community comment on. So a lot of work has gone into it, but there's a lot of opportunity to refine it as we move through some of these final steps of the process. Now, as you can imagine, with a process that is predicated on final voter ratification, community outreach was a must and a critical aspect of our overall work effort. So this particular slide just highlights some of the primary efforts that we conducted to, 1, get out to the public and make them aware of the general plan itself. But then also we need to provide opportunity for the public to give feedback. So one of the first efforts we conducted with the assistance of council is to establish that general plan committee. That's comprised of 18 members that were identified or recommended by council. To date, we've had a total of 7 meetings, over 2 hours each for these meetings. So this group has really rolled up their sleeves. They even at our last meeting asked to have another additional meeting, an 8th meeting during the 60-day review so that they can use that opportunity to go through the plan as well. So I thank you for recommending those members. They're really a great sounding board, right? We hear things from the public, but it's an opportunity for us to work with that committee and hear bounce ideas off of them and get to the more granular aspects of community feedback and how to respond to that feedback. We also naturally had community workshops where we asked the public to come to us, right? And we conducted those over 2 rounds with 3 meetings for each round. So that's have a meeting in North Goodyear, Central Goodyear, and Southern Goodyear. And we did that for 2 rounds, so a total of 6 meetings. But we also had a satellite meeting down in Mobile to hear from those residents, and that was very well attended. With all that, though, we know, especially since the pandemic, that asking residents to come to us doesn't get us to where we need to be when we're trying to hear from community feedback. So we complemented those in-person meetings with virtual workshops where residents could go online and hear the presentation. They got to listen to my presentation over again if they would like. But then they also got to go through the actual workshop exercises online. So if they weren't able to be there in person, we made those online methods available, and you can see the graphic second below there was actually a virtual room created with the stations in it, as if residents were navigating a typical meeting. They could go to whatever station of interest, click on that, see the boards associated with, and give their feedback within that virtual environment. But with all that, that's great opportunity to get feedback, but we still needed those touch points with those residents that may not engage at that higher level than some that visit council meetings or keep track of all the public meetings that are announced. So we really tried to also focus on target workshops, those workshops where we can go to the public and meet them on their schedule or their time. So we piggybacked a lot of special events, 5 total. So whether it be the recent Hops and Hops or the city ribbon cutting, those are all great opportunities that we got to meet a variety of different residents. And from that, we were also able to inform them about the process so that they could go learn more about it, but also get quick feedback from them on some of the key topics we were hearing from. Now, through that, we also heard from HOAs. So we reached out to HOAs and let them know that we were available if they would like us to present either to their community or to their board. And we had 4 opportunities to do that. So you can see on the bottom left was one image from Pebble Creek in their HOA presentation that was, as we all can imagine, very well attended. And so we were excited to have that opportunity again to get out in front of residents that we may not typically see. We also met with your youth commission. Now that was fantastic. Your youth commission came with some very refined feedback. I mean, this group was really on top of it. They understood how all the aspects of the community interacted and how housing impacts employment and how they want to see a community that they want to move back to when they graduate from college and what type of living arrangements that they would like to see. So we took a lot of their feedback and rolled it into the general plan in terms of goals and policies because I think it aligned very well with what we were hearing from the public. So I think we're all comforted by the fact that the youth in Goodyear are just on top of the topics as the parents are. And then naturally stakeholders within the community, whether it be state land or any specific provider within the community, we were happy to sit down with them and go through some of the more specific aspects that might be applicable to one stakeholder or the other. And so with that, we got a lot of great feedback that, of course, we also complemented with our supporting outreach, like our website, our social media postings, and certainly the In Focus magazine. Now, we got a lot of feedback through all that effort, and that report is, all that feedback is summarized in a public involvement report that is available on the project website. But here's some of the key takeaways from that report. When we looked at the community feedback, we didn't just ask residents about feedback verbally, right, to tell us what are the challenges or what are the opportunities in the community, but we also asked them geographically, where are some comments, to understand not just from a comment standpoint what residents are concerned about or want to focus more on, but really physically in the community, where do they see opportunity and challenges. So you can see growth areas. We were somewhat surprised to see residents talk about growth in North Goodyear in terms of recognizing infill development rather than just greenfield sprawl development in southern or south of the Gila. So that was encouraging to see, but we certainly heard from residents through the verbal feedback of that needs to be tempered with recognizing the impacts from that growth and how to mitigate that. So we didn't blindly just take that feedback and run with it. We had to complement it with some of the other things we're hearing. And then preservation, I would just pause on that Gila River. We were excited to see how much residents within the city acknowledge the value that the Gila River can provide to Goodyear in terms of its environmental aspect, but even tourism, and how it complements the larger Rio Reimagined project, if you're familiar with that. So some of the other reoccurring themes of the feedback there are listed on the slide, so I don't think a lot of them are going to surprise, especially council, in terms of residents being concerned about water availability and conservation, traffic congestion, wanting more retail. I'd love to see if everyone can guess what the most frequent in retail desired was. Trader Joe's, you guys are on it. Exactly. A Trader Joe's was that and pickleball were probably the top two comments of specific feedback. But as we group it into themes, you can see hopefully that this does cover a lot, but I think does hit the very important aspects that we've heard through all our outreach efforts. The only thing I'll say about the right-hand side to stay brief is that that's feedback that we heard from our general plan committee. And I placed that on the slide just to let you see that there's some synergies there between what we were hearing from the general plan committee compared to what we were hearing from the public overall. So I think, again, it gives us confidence that when we're soundboarding things with the committee, that they have a finger on the pulse in terms of what the broader community is keying into. Now, with all of that feedback, right, we've gotten through the process, where we are in the overall effort and that input, then we start putting pen to paper. And when we do that, one of the first things we do is look at the vision statement, because that's going to set the foundation for the plan, right? Everything in this plan should roll up to achieve that vision statement. And so when we talked about that with the community overall and with the general plan committee, one thing we heard is in the yellow boxes on the right-hand side is the vision statement from the existing general plan that's on the books today, as well as the fundamental strategies that support that vision. What we heard from the community, though, is that they would like to see a little more detail in that vision statement and a little more clarity on those fundamental strategies as to how that makes Goodyear distinct. How can we make this vision statement be a little more specific to what Goodyear wants to be in the future or what Goodyear will be in the future, as opposed to maybe a more, or what you see that very succinct statement. So with the work of the General Plan Committee, we refined the vision statement to what you see on the slide, but then we pressed that committee to say, if this vision is achieved, what does Goodyear look like in 2035? And what we came out of it is those 6 fundamental strategies of being livable and connected, inclusive and diverse, healthy and sustained, resilient and safe, prosperous and innovative, and responsible and accessible. Now you might ask, well, how does the detail go along with those broad statements? And I'll give that context by talking about the structure of the general plan. So here we see the overall table of contents, if you will, from the current general plan. And you can see that Chapter 3 up front, the vision and fundamental strategies are established right up front. But then the bulk of the general plan is all organized around those 3 chapters 5, 6, and 7, where we talk about physical growth and development, community and culture, and economic development. But what we heard from the general plan committee was we kind of lose that context of we set this vision and fundamental strategies, but we kind of lose how are we achieving those fundamental strategies within these 3 chapters. They also commented that the goals, objectives, policies, and actions seem to kind of break things out maybe a little too fine-grained, and can we simplify that a little bit? That, isn't an objective close to a goal, and how do our policies align with our actions? So, in aligning our vision and fundamental strategies with the structure of the plan, where we're approaching the update is to actually use those fundamental strategies as the chapters of the plan. And so those become the guiding document that if we can hand this to a resident and say, you have 5 minutes to kind of look through this general plan and tell us what this community is all about, that you can see from the topics of these chapters what is important to this community, and then based on your level of interest, you can go to that chapter and learn how are we going to be more livable and connected? How are we going to be more inclusive and diverse? And within those, you can then see we simplified it to stating the goals and policies. And then the action items, the to-do list, that moves into implementation. So that this starts to becoming like a layers of a cake, that as you want to get more into the general plan, you have that ability to go deeper into it. But if you're a resident and you're just trying to touch the high level, you can get the specifics fairly quickly. And then if you wanted to get into more detail, you're a developer or you're looking to open a business, you can start getting into the design standards or the development standards and the implementation. So trying to look at organization to how we can make the plan more user-friendly. And so one of the last slides that I'll touch on is just the spotlight areas. So tonight's about just letting you know where we are in the process, but we wanted to at least let you know that over the coming months, as we have additional workshops to tell you about some of the aspects in the plan, that these are some of the takeaways of we heard that feedback, and here are some of the spotlight areas that we're focusing on within those edits. So when we talk about or hearing from the public that water availability and conservation was key, we're naturally looking at how we can make water resources and conservation more prominent in the plan. So one of those is having a matrix within the plan that shows how water or goals and policies within the plan that might not be specifically under the water topic are cross-pollinating, that there's other policies within this general plan and other chapters that help with conservation, whether it be how we address land use to how we approach landscaping. All of that can impact water conservation beyond just talking about our water master plan and what that objective is. A balanced approach to housing. So we heard from the public. We had comments about, is there too much multifamily housing? We heard comments about, hey, I'm concerned about affordability. We need to be mindful of that. And so where we're approaching the general plan is the notion of a balanced approach to housing for all. That this is a plan that is looking at housing at all economic levels. It's not just looking at specific housing and pulling that out and either focusing on it or limiting it to certain areas. What this plan is recognizing is that Goodyear is a community of, or a growing community, right, that used to be family focused, and now it has residents of all different dynamics, whether you're retired or single or just getting out of college. We need opportunities for all those points in one's lifestyle, and so that's where the plan is approaching housing overall. The growth areas is a way that we're looking to promote retail development. We all know that the community can't, or Goodyear can't specifically get that Trader Joe's, but we can create the environment to offer that opportunity. So growth areas is one that working with economic development, we're touching on that. Quality design practices, we heard from the public that in addition to all the growth we're seeing, that we care about the aesthetic quality of our community, so pay attention to that, Matt, as they will say. Support emerging technology, so we see micromobility, scooters, autonomous vehicles, all of that we know how it might impact the way we travel and the opportunities we have for that. But working with our transportation master plan and that effort, which is going on, the last bullet point, to ensure that we're not just looking to address traffic congestion through building more roads and wider roads. It's a comprehensive approach that we're looking at all different opportunities, and technology should be one of those to address that. Better control of light industrial and the business and commerce land use. We heard about big footprint warehouse buildings, and those light industrial type of uses are allowed within our business and commerce land use type that often is sometimes in proximity to residential development. And so we're trying to identify some policies that will help recognize or mitigate the impacts from those large footprint users, and make sure that there's controls in place to make sure we don't have overabundance of those within proximity to residential that might create incompatible situations. And then last, enhance our focus on the Gila River and open space like we talked about. And as I mentioned, the other takeaway here is Goodyear is very on top of it in terms of, I believe this is what the city did last go-round 10 years ago on the general plan, but you're updating your Parks and Rec master plan and your transportation master plan at the same time of the general plan. We don't usually have that luxury. And so it's great that at the end of this process, we're going to have 3 of your most critical plans for the community all speaking the same language in terms of what they're working towards and how they're working to accomplish that. So with that, I'll just close on next steps. Again, I mentioned that we're working on finalizing the public review draft this month so that we'll be in position to push that out for that 60-day review starting June 1st. And then during that 60-day review process, we'll have our 3rd community workshop. So that series, which will consist of 3 meetings again, North, Central, South, and virtual meeting, is an opportunity because residents don't necessarily always want to crack open a general plan to review all of it, but certainly want to be informed. That's what that workshop number 3 is all about, to tell them what's in the plan, give them a little Reader's Digest, and answer their questions. We'll meet again with that general plan committee based on their request for an 8th meeting. And then, as I mentioned, we'll come back before you with some work sessions to give you some highlights of what feedback we've heard and how we incorporated it into the plan, so that hopefully you're in a position when we go to Planning Commission and get their recommendation that council will be, comfortable with where we're headed come adoption in November. And that all puts us on track for that May special election. So I apologize for the fast talking and a lot of input, but with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to comments or responses.
Who wants to start it off? Go ahead, Councilmember Gillis.
What was the community information that you figured from Mobile? How did you feel about their involvement?
Yeah, Mobile we really enjoyed going down there and hearing some of the issues that were specific to them. And their overall input varied from being very focused on kind of near-term aspects like trash collection and street paving and those dynamics. But there was also comments about interim development, that our land use plan contemplates a future land use scenario all the way down to Mobile. In many instances in that area, it's more intensive than what the development exists today. And the reality of when that development is going to occur is fairly, far out.
Long-term.
And so what we looked at in the general plan and what we're working with staff is an overlay approach in that Mobile area that would allow them to continue to utilize their land consistent with the rural quality that they see down there. So that was probably the biggest takeaway from a general plan standpoint, is recognizing from them that, hey, we have a rural quality right now. I understand what you guys are envisioning long-term, but does that mean that we can't continue our rural lifestyle in the interim? And so we're trying to identify or recognize that in the planning horizon, which is the 10 years of this plan, to give them that flexibility to function within that rural quality, knowing that we still have a long-term view of maybe more intensive uses around some of that existing development.
Very long-term.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah, and they're okay with that.
Well, that was the direction that they were most interested in. We haven't had an opportunity to go back to them yet and share that input, but that is hopefully the expectation, is that we want to let them know we heard you, and that's why we're putting these elements in the community.
That's what I'm asking. Okay,
Yeah.
because I want them to know that we heard them.
I agree. They were very understanding, I guess, in terms of when we went down there, that Goodyear has a lot of different issues to address. And so there was times where they said, we're Mobile, so I don't know if this will resonate, but we absolutely want every part of the community to feel that this general plan touches them, so.
Great, great, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for all your hard work and everything you've done to put this plan together. I just have a couple questions about how kind of the puzzle pieces are going to fit together, so if you'll bear with me. The first one is you said design standards. Will those be done when this goes, I mean, are those going to come online at the same time, or are we going to have a gap?
Yes, so I think what you're referencing is when we kicked off this general plan effort, one of the things that staff recognized in the city overall is that from this general plan effort, there's then going to be need or opportunity to update the zoning code. And so when we proposed on this particular effort, updating the general plan was kind of phase one, and then updating design guidelines and the zoning ordinance was phase two. And so one of the things that we just worked to kick off today is starting to work on updating the design guidelines that the city has in anticipation of the general plan moving forward with that guidance. So the general plan will not have maybe the detailed design standards that the design guidelines have, but that is coming out of this process, and we're even kicking it off earlier than originally anticipated.
And then my other question, I got two more. The other one's about, we're doing a police study, and we've done fire station studies. As we do this, are we, as part of this, are those studies going to be online? Because if we need more police officers, we'll probably need someplace to put the police officers throughout the city, and same thing for fire. Is that going to be done in time to put those aspects in the plan?
The Goodyear is very busy right now.
I know we
are. To pile on the Parks and Rec master plan, the transportation master plan, getting the design guidelines underway, the city's also working on a facilities master plan and updating that. And we're assisting with that effort as well. And that master plan is on schedule, if you will. And so I think that document will provide maybe some of that additional detail, but that document is speaking to all the other departments in the community about what are the resources you need to better program that long-term so that Goodyear's utilizing your funds effectively.
Okay, so yeah, as we program these areas, we want to make sure we have places to put people that we think we will need.
So to add maybe to that, the one thing we want to be sensitive to in the general plan is, given that it's a document that is updated every 10 years, we try to thread that needle, right, of having it be general to provide flexibility to respond to current situations, but we also need to put in some detail there of we are committing to X, Y, Z. So that I would qualify why we don't provide all of that information in the general plan up front, so that the city can be a little more flexible in responding through master plans and those types of reports. So that's where that design guidelines and facility master plan, I think, would provide that detail.
And then the last one, you said we're going to be updating the zoning, so I don't know if this is for you or not, but we talked about adding commercial office park zoning. Is that still being looked at?
I'll let
Because some of
maybe
these aren't
Steve take that
warehouse,
one.
they're commercial.
Mayor, council members, we do have homework that is outside of this process, outside of the general plan.
Homework, I like that.
That new zoning district is something that, yes, staff is looking into, separate from the general plan, something that we will get probably done sooner than the zoning ordinance update. That is Matt's phase two after he does all this work for the general plan.
Well, thank you. You have plenty of homework, so thank you for all your hard work. Thank you.
Homework is good.
Vice Mayor?
Well, I want to thank you, Matt, for such a great report. It's very clear, easy to read, great graphics, and I know you've really been out there. I was at a club meeting in Pebble Creek when you were talking about the process, and there's a lot to it, and appreciate how you're really out there in the community talking with them. About how many residents did you actually come in contact with at your in-person and virtual meetings? I'd just like to know.
Yes, a great question. The in-person touch points in terms of our community workshops where we ask people to sign in or virtually, we unfortunately only had maybe just over 100 participate in person. But that's where those target workshops, where we get out and join your special events, in that aspect, we've reached hundreds of residents. And those conversations, I think, have been more rewarding, if you will. We have deeper conversations at our community workshops, but our touch points, our target workshops, we're trying to get very specific feedback. So we might just have a dot exercise for them to tell us what's a priority for you, as opposed to at the community workshop where we can give a comment card and get very more detailed input. So I will say yes, that in-person feedback at the various locations was fairly light. But we complemented that with the online and the further outreach to try to bolster that.
Good. Well, thank you for offering virtual. I think that is a great way to go, especially in these times. It seemed that a number of the themes really resonated, certainly things we've heard a lot, but then there's some comments regarding some things that I haven't heard before. So I guess it's a bit of a mix. I wanted to comment that I was really pleased that you engaged the Youth Commission. Their generation's voice is important, and I think that was a great idea. And my last question has to do with what's staff involvement. For example, great interest in preserving Gila River, Rio Reimagine, but just like growth and development Mobile, that's a long-term plan. And are we helping to manage expectations on that?
I mean, I can maybe kick it off. At least I would say that staff has been terrific in terms of naturally with, I appreciate everyone recognizing our work effort, but staff is right there with us in terms of meeting with us regularly to go over the plan and talk about all of these aspects. And then we also had an all-day charrette where we worked with staff to get their input on some of the finer points of that. So with that, we then would pull staff in when we had a meeting with Rio Reimagine to let them talk to us about what are their initiatives. And so I think that's where we look to pull staff in, obviously more at the representation level to make sure that we have all the pieces at the table when we're having those conversations. So I don't know if you wanted to elaborate.
And Mayor, council members, the only thing I would say to add to what Matt said is when we do meet with these various groups and we do hear preservation, whether it's ag land or the Gila River or just open space in general, we do reinforce the message that there's a balance of preservation and also property rights. So when residents do talk to us, we make sure that we try as best we can to say, we try to balance that there are property rights. Someone does have the right to develop their property in accordance with their entitlements. The city cannot just go out and preserve land and just go about doing that. And we do get that opinion sometimes, but it is your right, Vice Mayor. It is trying to just, this is our position, this is a little bit of education, and try to get that word out.
Great. I appreciate that, and certainly I hope there's some awareness of, even the activities at the state legislature regarding to zoning and design, because that's a big battle for us as well. And those things they want to make decisions on could conceivably be taken away from us. So it's interesting times. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Hampton?
Yeah, there are a lot of things that have already been said, but yeah, no, I really appreciate the effort and going forward. I was on the last general plan committee, which was really a really good experience. I just had a question. I know you mentioned South Goodyear or Mobile. I know the last plan only ended just south of really Cantamia. Was this for the entire city now? We looked at everything in between Mobile and Cantamia, for example,
Yeah,
in the planning zone.
Thank you, council member and mayor. The existing general plan and all general plans within the state are required to address the entire planning area of the community. So without a map here, so yes, we're not just looking at the incorporated limits of the city. We're looking at the entire planning area, which incorporated limits of Goodyear actually go pretty far as well. But your existing general plan does go all the way down to Mobile. And so we did not, other than capturing a couple donut holes, if you will, between Avondale's planning area and Goodyear's planning area, we did not adjust the overall planning area that exists in the current general plan. So, so that,
I guess I'm confused on, because I know when we were looking at water, for example, in certain areas, we said, well, wait, that's not in our planning area yet, so we haven't looked at that particularly. So I thought it stopped at, not Elliott, but it stopped at, I forget the road down there. But I thought we stopped at, that's where the general plan for us, for planning purposes, had stopped, but I guess maybe I'm incorrect. But I know, because we didn't want to plan out for things that we're not for 10 years at that point, that we
Right.
weren't going to be planning out where to put everything at certain, or a more detailed level.
right. Your memory is probably spot on in the term of Goodyear doesn't provide water to all residents in Goodyear. So that might be what you're thinking of, is that not necessarily all areas of the planning area are serviced by Goodyear for one particular topic or the other. But overall, yes, the general plan does cover the entire planning boundary.
Yeah, no, that's great. If it looks now at adding everything commercial and all the different areas, housing and things like that, or I could have swore it only went up to a certain road at the time, but I could be wrong, so I probably am. So, and then, yeah, no, and I appreciate you looking at the balance. I know you talked, residents were concerned or had questions about housing, and I was just want to make sure that all types of housing were talked about, and we're not leaning towards maybe one type versus another type. Obviously, we'd all like nothing but executive housing, but I know that's not possible either, but just making sure that we're not leaning towards one versus another, and that it's at least somewhat balanced. I'm not sure if the plan reflects that, or at least gives us leeway to be able to maybe choose a different type of housing that's not even created yet as well.
I think, Councilmember, you summarized it well in terms of we're trying to, again, give the community that detail about what is Goodyear's strategy to housing. So we don't want to, be non-committal, but we also want to recognize that there are some positives that come out of having flexibility, that we don't want to limit ourselves because we thought of or didn't think of something now that then will cause us to have to make a decision that we actually all don't want to make, 5 or 10 years down the line. So you're correct in that we're focusing on that goal and policy development of providing housing opportunity to meet the demand within the community applicable to the different lifestyles that Goodyear is accommodating. So.
Yeah, and then also just make sure that there's adequate amount of, I don't know, just when you look at the map, that there's housing here, that if we have a commercial area that can support however many people in that general area, just what that would look like as well. Just make sure all the components of a healthy city are accounted for in the plan of that could be, we're not gonna be built out for quite a while. So just thinking of those kind of things so we can have the leeway, but also provide all the services and resources and amenities that our residents would like as well.
Well said. I think we're working on the same sheet of music there.
Okay. No, I appreciate, like I said, I know it's a long process, so I appreciate all the hard work, and I'm looking forward to, it comes back November or so to us, so.
Yeah, we'll
Or
look at
June,
August
September,
or September
yeah, so-
for some work
Okay.
sessions.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, sounds great, thank you.
Councilmember Campbell? Hit it up a little higher. There you go. You got it right there.
Thank you. So I know you said you spoke to 4 different HOAs, and one of them was Pebble Creek. Who were the other 3?
Actually, we reached out to all the HOAs that
You had the list for.
that we had the list
Right,
of.
uh-huh.
And so we don't know all that pushed this information out to their residents. We know that several did, but of the ones that just reached out to us, Canyon Trails.
Great.
So we spoke to their their board. We
Wonderful.
didn't meet at one of their meetings. And then during the 60-day review, we did have, I apologize, I can't remember what phase, but another phase of Canyon Trails asked us to present.
Good.
But the timing of when their board met ended up that we scheduled it during the 60-day review. So that's to come.
Perfect.
And then the other 3 meetings were all Pebble Creek.
Perfect.
So we had one overall meeting with Pebble Creek, and then through that effort,
Two others.
2 more. Yep.
Well, I know that a lot of times how we get our information to our HOAs is through their boards, and then they disseminate it through their homeowners and their residents, and we can only hope that they will continue to do that. So thank you for sending your information out that way. That's the best way to do it. And like at Estrella, we all have e-groups and emails and all that goes out, you know.
Yes.
What's good in Goodyear is also a website, and so we appreciate that. But I'm looking forward to seeing the general plan. I just want to be clear that when someone looks at our general plan, they'll be able to determine what areas are commercial and zone commercial, so that we don't have to continually have a conversation with, they had no clue that this particular land was commercial, that something would be developed on there. And I don't know how we can educate them any more than what we are, but I'm hoping that once we get the final general plan and we go out and speak to the residents, that we can emphasize that so that they understand there's certain areas in the city that are going to be zone commercial that are commercial, period.
Right. Yeah. Setting those expectations. We agree.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really important, and it's really disheartening when we're having a conversation about a development coming into an area, and the residents say, oh, I didn't know a high school was going in there, or an elementary school, are you kidding me? No, it's right there. We had no idea. So I don't know how else we can educate our residents on what this general plan looks like, but hopefully we can just, each of us in our own networking can do this.
And one of the things, council member, that your comments sparked in my mind is, while we're going to have a traditional PDF, if you will, print document of the general plan, we're also going to have an online version.
Oh, great.
So that will make it a little more user-friendly, I think, to navigate. And then the other thing that we're looking at is maybe if it's not in the plan, it could be associated with the plan, is a little tutorial, if you will, of if you're interested in this and a topic or subject,
Click here.
click here or
Good.
go to these goals and policies to learn more. And that way, again, most residents we find, have specific areas that they key into. And that could be another little handy cheat sheet to get them through all the other aspects to, again, get to that information that hopefully will give them the education that you're speaking of it's in the plan, you just probably,
They didn't know
overlooked
where
it.
to look for it,
Yeah.
so, good. Well, thank you. I'm excited to see it, so thank you for your hard work.
Thank you for the
I
chance.
know it's quite a daunting task.
We enjoy it.
Well, I'm hoping, I appreciate the presentation. There's not a whole lot to add to what already has been said, except I'm hoping all your hard work is not thwarted by what's going on at our state legislature. I'm kind of scared about what they're trying to do down there. And all surveys indicate that they're on the wrong track, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll listen to you, all right? And again, I imagine some of your biggest challenges out there is property rights and the availability of setting land aside. That's got to be very challenging. I know when I'm out there, when we call it when the residential or the multifamily or whatever the case may be, why are they going up? Well, if they're zoned for there and we need a variety of housing, not everybody can afford the very expensive housing that we have around here. People have to have a place. So it gets very challenging. I appreciate all the effort you go out there to try to simplify it to our residents and make sure that they're aware of all this is going on. And I appreciate the hard work. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that, the last item for the work session is the 2023 bond election. Go ahead and introduce yourself for the public.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Jared Askelson. I'm the Deputy Finance Director here with the city. I've got Paul Bentz, the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Research from High Ground, here tonight to talk to you about the general obligation bond election. Last week, we presented the recommendation from the Citizens Bond Exploratory Committee to the council. Tonight, we'll have a discussion about a potential general obligation bond for November of this year. We'll go through the background of a general obligation bond and some of the committee recommendations. The public opinion survey that was conducted, there were actually 2 of them. And finally, we'll talk specifically about the items within the committee recommendation. And we've got 4 things. There we go. 4 things specifically we want to talk about. The effects of the property tax rate policy, because the committee received specific direction from the council to maintain the $1.74 property tax rate guideline that we have in place. We'll talk about the results of the second public opinion survey. We'll also have information about the first public opinion survey. We'll talk about the topic of reserving some dollars for future elections. That came up specifically with the facilities category, so we'll go through that. And then in the end, we want to get direction from council on a call for election and action that you would be taking a week from tonight. So we'll start with some background. General obligation bond is it's a way that the city borrows money to pay for infrastructure. For a general obligation bond, it's backed by a secondary property tax rate, and the amount that we can levy is based on the assessed valuation of the city. It usually has the lowest interest rate of any borrowing that the city can do because the secondary property tax rate is a very secure method of backing a bond. So with general obligation bonds, though, we have 3 items that limit them potentially. First is the voter authorization, which is why we're talking about the general obligation bond election. Second is the state statute imposed debt capacity limit that the city has, every city has. And finally, the city's own property tax guideline. So voter authorization, this graph, I think we've seen this a few times. We had a work session back in October where we talked about this. So at this point, back in 2004, we had $284 million worth of voter authorization. That was when we had the last election for voter authorization for general obligation bonds. And last year, we issued bonds and brought that total down to $44.4 million of voter authorization. A chunk of that for sewer, the rest for storm, sewer, drainage, and bridges. So the main categories that we've totally used are public safety, transportation, facilities, and parks and recreation. We've used that voter authorization up over the last 6 years. The next topic, which will be a non-topic, is the debt capacity. You can see the debt capacity is essentially a math problem using our total full cash value, assessed value of the city, times 26%, and then subtracting out any of the existing debt that we have. Right now, our debt capacity sits at $452 million, which greatly exceeds any amount that we'd be looking to go out for voter authorization. Finally, we have the available property tax and the debt service graph that I'm showing you in front of you. The orange is what our existing debt service is. The blue is the debt service that we could issue based on the $1.74 property tax rate that we have set by guideline, by the financial policies that we have. The forecast that you see here is based off of the state statutes. So in the state statutes, they say you can use a growth of your 10-year average of your last 10 years of growth, which is about 9.4% increase in valuation that we have projected here for the first 5 years. Then after that, you have to take 1/5 of that amount. So you see we have 9.4% increase, and then it drops to 1.9 going forward. The reason why we use this forecast is because this allows us to show that we will not be increasing over that $1.74 over the life of the bond in any publication that we make. Most specifically, we have some information, a required publicity pamphlet that will show the tax rate, the tax impacts, and it's important for us to be able to show that we're not showing an increase. So the total tax rate in the policy is at or below $1.74. We calculated based on that forecast that we showed you, the total threshold could be $232 million that we could issue. The recommendation came in at $192 million from the committee. We'll talk a little bit more about that, how specifically with facilities, there was $40 million that was reserved for a future bond election, but we can talk about that in a few more slides. This here shows us what the recommendation was, $95 million for transportation, public safety at $80 million, parks and recreation at $17 million with an asterisk, which Mr. Bentz will help us out with here in a couple of slides. And finally, facilities, no recommendation coming forward from the committee at this time. Any comments at this point before we get into talking about the public opinion surveys? Any comments about the $1.74 limit? Any changes to that you would like to see, or you feel comfortable with where we're at with that limit and the $232 million total threshold there?
The only comment I would like to make is we always talk about the $1.74, and this, I know I sound like a bad record, but as long as assessed valuations are increasing at 5%, there still is a tax increase, so.
That
Just
is-
for the record.
Yep, Mayor, that is correct. And when we do the publicity pamphlets, any publicity that we have, it will actually state that it's going to be a tax increase, much like we do with the truth in taxation annually for the budget.
Okay, that's fine. Did you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. So if it, I mean, even if it did raise the $1.74, we're not really even getting close. We're not maxing that out at this point. It looked like, if I remember the last one as well, because you said there's so much margin in there between the existing debt service and available property tax.
This slide that I pulled up here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, with the last bond that we issued, we actually front-loaded that bond, and if you look, you can see we're really close to the amount that we have available
And that
right
drops
now.
off.
Essentially, so that we can start working on a potential bond election that we're talking about right now, and then it'll drop off after fiscal year 2026.
Okay, yep. Thank you.
Councilmember Lorentano?
Well, thank you very much, and I liked all of I kind of geeked out on all of the percentages, and I don't know if maybe this question's a little early, but the 17 million did give me a little heartburn for Parks and Recs, because we just had another presentation where Arts and Culture, Parks and Rec for the general plan, and I went to the hospital board meeting, and one of the things that people, we want those doctors' salaries and stuff to recruit doctors and physicians, the $300,000-$400,000 people are making a lot of money that for the executive housing, that they are looking for places with plays, arts and culture. And we've got some really lovely housing that's very expensive in Pebble Creek. I know that, and some in Palm Valley, but the doctor who's 42 years old and has a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old isn't going to live in Pebble Creek. So I'm kind of a little disturbed by that 17 million, because I know that's an area that our citizens always want us to focus on. And I do know from looking at your statistics that it was very skewed heavily towards an older population, the results, which is different than our general survey. So maybe you could touch on that, or the city manager, as we go through this, how we're going to make sure that we have those amenities if it's not through bonding or whatever. Because I know this was what would pass was your question,
Yes.
not what we want. So I don't know, I'm a little confused there. So any help throughout would be great.
Absolutely. Are we on to that part, or you?
There may be other questions?
Hold on one second. Vice Mayor, do you have anything? Go ahead.
I'm with Sherry. I'm very concerned about 17 million for Parks and Rec when people are beating my door down saying, we want more pickleball courts, we want more sports fields, we want more play areas for our kids. So somebody is missing the boat here. I mean, you're gonna call me in Pebble Creek and ask me about Park and Rec, and I've got everything at my fingertips. I'm not gonna say, well, gee whiz, maybe we need another lap pool or something. So that's what I'm really worried about, and I'm concerned transportation for 95 million. What are they thinking we're gonna do for 95 million? We're not gonna put another freeway in. We don't want any more street lights or red lights. I don't understand that thinking. In fact, the whole survey, I was just really disappointed at.
One bridge.
One bridge? Yeah, well, we won't even pay for the Estrella Bridge, so.
That ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, I don't know. And then to know that you make phone calls, if someone calls me and says, hello, I'm Joe Blow from the whatever, and I'm taking a survey, I hang up. I'm just not going to be bothered. So I'm not sure that doing our survey was, I mean, I'm just surprised and disappointed at this, very much so. Because I don't know that they're in tune with what the public is telling us as council members of what they want to see in their city.
Yeah, unfortunately, Wally, I think it's who shows up to vote is the issue, so, and go ahead there, if you want to expand on that?
Let's go ahead and get into the public opinion survey. So just a little bit of background there. So there were actually 2 surveys that were completed. The first was in February. This is the one that was used by the committee. It was about 46 questions in total, very comprehensive, and Paul will talk more about that. The second one was completed at the end of April after the recommendation was put together and asked specifically the questions as they were recommended by the committee. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul, and you can probably use that.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Bentz. I not only am the Senior Vice President of Research and Strategy, I'm your neighbor. I live here in Goodyear. It's the closest meeting I get to come to, so I'm always happy to come and present to you. We did do 2 different citywide surveys. And if you want to take one thing away from this, whether it's good news or bad news, the issue is those who vote, vote. Those who don't, don't. And if you're going to call for an election in November of 2023, the folks that are going to show up in an off-cycle election when there's no president at the top of the ticket and when there's no governor's race to vote on is a significantly smaller, significantly more narrow electorate. Our voter turnout in Goodyear in a presidential year will be about 75%. That's 75% of registered voters. Now, bear in mind, about 25% of our adult population is not even registered to vote. So we are talking about, at our finest day, you're talking to a much larger citizenry than shows up to vote. Because at the highest voter turnout for president, we're talking about 60% of adults. Means 4 at 10 are staying home. If they said they voted, they're lying to you. So just bear that in mind. So when we're talking about the 2022 gubernatorial cycle that we just went through, that had about 65% turnout. That means of the adult population, about 50%. So half the folks stayed home in that election. If you go out in November of 2023, your turnout will be somewhere between 25 and 30%. It is a significantly lower, significantly older electorate. So what the folks may be telling you out in the public can be true, but they're not necessarily showing up to vote. My job is to give you accurate, unbiased information based on if you were to call an election for November of 2023, how the folks would vote. So that's through both our February poll and our April poll. That's the goal of all of this. As a resident myself, I would like more parks and recreation. But as a person who does this for a living, when I look at the electorate itself, I don't get to choose who shows up. I know who's going to show up. And hopefully maybe some younger voters would show up and folks would show up around them. But I always poll based on who I know is going to show up so that you, as decision makers, can make decisions based on what's likely to happen, not what would you like to happen. So that's where the value of polling is. Sometimes I have to give bad news. I'm sorry. That's one of the things that I do. I like to show up and give good news. But not everything that I get to deliver is always good news. So what we're going to spend a little bit of time on is the second survey. We'll go back and talk a little bit about some of the lessons we learned from the first survey. But bear in mind that almost half of all of our voters in November of 2023 will be over the age of 65. So we do have to put a significant number of calls into Pebble Creek. We call both home phones and cell phones as required by law, and we get quite a good response rate. I monitor it all the time to make sure that we are still getting a very accurate review of that. For every person who does hang up on us, we do have somebody else that's willing to chat, and they pretty much balanced each other out. As we have been pretty accurate. I did call the governor's race. I did call the United States Senate's race. I've been pretty good about our local polling as well when it comes to school elections. I'm pretty confident in these results that we talk to likely voters. What that means is these are people who have a history of showing up in our elections. They vote in our primaries, they vote in our off-cycle elections, they voted in the 19 and or 2021 school elections. These are the people that we know show up no matter what. So we balance it based on that. That means about 3/4 of the respondents, and given an election without additional people turning folks out, would be over the age of 50. It's about a 13-point Republican participation advantage. This is not voter registration, bear in mind. If you did voter registration, it would be evenly divided in about thirds. It'd be about a third Republicans, about a third Democrats, and about a third independents. But what we see is, especially in an election like this, Republicans tend to over-participate and everybody else tends to under-participate. So we take that into account as we go through this polling as well. And then we use zip codes to make sure that we had a regional representation as well to ensure that we are getting a citywide balance of this as we look through the data. So a couple of things that I think should be good news for you is, number one, is that your electorate is very happy with Goodyear. 71% of your likely voters think that the city's heading in the right direction. I was recently in a meeting with the mayor talking about statewide. We did a statewide number about if people think their local community is headed in the right direction. Statewide, it's about 56%. So you are about 15 points higher. There's a lot more optimism about the direction of the city among even this off-cycle electorate across all age demographics, including 65 and older, both in 85338 and 85395. So this is a citywide approval of the direction of the city. So congratulations. This is one of the higher ones that we tested. 70% is near the upper echelon. Most municipalities, as I mentioned, are somewhere in that 50, sometimes 60% range as we go through this. We also did a job performance. You have almost a little over 50% that gave you an excellent or very good. I'm sorry, 49%. But when we look at this, we're going to use a couple things called mean scores, and Jared's going to go back to these later, so I think they're just important to discuss what they are. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 meaning failing to 5 meaning excellent, we're going to look at things with a mean score, so it's like an average. What a mean score does is it takes the people who don't answer it and pulls them out so that you're not over-influencing their average as part of it. At a 3.66, what that means is that the majority of the electorate generally thinks that the city is doing a very good job. That's basically somewhere between okay and very good. You can see at the 52% of our 65 and older are giving you an excellent to very good rating as well. So it is not that people don't have confidence in the city. People are very happy with the city, but we do have things like inflation. We do have concerns about taxation. I've done 2 different statewide surveys in the last month that the gas prices have impacted people's concerns about high pricing and affordability. In one survey, while gas prices were high, affordability was the number 2 issue facing the state. When gas prices came down a little bit, it was the number 4 issue. So there's some volatility when it comes to investor confidence and concerns with the electorate among inflation. So we asked, these are based on the questions themselves, using the ballot language. Why we replicate the ballot language is because if you ask money, do you want more money for this? I use education all the time. Would you like to give more money to schools? People say yes. Would you like to pay taxes for more money for schools? Fewer people say yes. Would you like to exceed the revenue control limit for 8 years, and for the fiscal year 22, 23? Even fewer people. Ballot language matters. So we always test the ballot language itself. I will tell you, I know there were some questions about what people want with streets. We did test various projects. There's several projects that are very popular. There is a rising concern in the West Valley regarding congestion. It's not just in Goodyear, but throughout the entire West Valley. There are significant concerns coming with growth that our streets are congested, that there's traffic, the scalp streets, some of those things where we see them, those are much higher than usual. Generally in the past, what we saw is that public safety did very well. People would always be willing to invest in more fire stations, more police stations, more public safety. That remains true. But one thing that we have noticed is that concerns for investing in transportation, particularly in the absence of Prop 400, is a desire among the electorate. They would like to make sure that their streets are being maintained and that are being widened. But most importantly, intersection and traffic safety. Folks want to know that we're doing everything that we can to invest in the safety of our intersections and that people know they can get from one place to another safely. So we tested this with the actual ballot language, and we find it at 53% yes compared to 42% no. The margin of error on this polling is 4.9, so it could be about 5 points higher. It could be about 5 points lower. So we could be looking at a 58% range or about a 48% range. One of the things that I look at this, though, is that it's about a 10-point differential between the yes and the no. And that bodes well for this proposal compared to some of the other proposals where it's a little bit more narrow. There is investment or desire to invest in transportation. You can see that it is slightly underwater with the 65 and older. It is slightly underwater with Republicans overall, but it has a strong amount of support from the remaining age segments and the 8 remaining partisan segments that puts it in a really, in a pretty good spot. Similarly, we see the same thing when it comes to public safety. This one is at 54%. It's right about at that 55% threshold that we like to see for these types of proposals because of the margin of error. You can see one of the values of that is that it does have an increased amount of support from 65 and older. It does also maintain a plurality of Republicans, but not quite a majority. But those two slight shifts in those audiences that over-participate is what put public safety in a slightly stronger position when you compare that to streets. It also has about half the size of the don't know. The don't know in the previous one was about 4 points. In this case, it's about 2.3. Finally, in Parks and Recreation, what we see is it's at a 52% compared to 46% no. So while the other two had about a 10-point differential of 52 to 42, this one's a lot closer. It's 52 to 46, so it's about cut in half. So of the three, especially in this order, the one that maintains the most risk is Parks. Part of that has to do with the fact that it is 18 points underwater with Republicans. So if there are concerns of who's not wanting more parks in the community or who's not willing to make the investment, that combined with the 65 and older audience are the two audiences that in this cycle, in this electorate, do not appear to be willing to make those investments. So barring going out in a different election cycle with more voters, like a presidential cycle or something else, these two very influential audiences would play a major role in determining whether or not the parks issue would have a chance or not on this ballot.
Before we get off that slide real quick, I just want to point out, you'll notice there's a note there for February, when we did the question in February, about 41% at that time. That question we asked was a $75 million question in total. So as part of the conversation we had with the committee, they thought maybe the dollar amount in total was too much. So that's one of the reasons why they wanted to go with a $17 million question and test it on the second one. So you see quite a bit of a swing there because the dollar amount's different than it was in February as well.
That's a great catch. I should lean back more so I can see. We did test it in February, and it was significantly, it had over 50% no. So reducing the number from 75 down to 17 million made a significant difference in raising the amount of support that it had for that. And then we did test the facilities, and the facilities one had a 34% yes compared to a 61% no. Just in this electorate, in this environment, not a lot of appetite among the electorate. We did put them in an order, and this was on purpose because this was the order in which they would likely be asked on the ballot. We do see that there is voter fatigue and voter drop-off as you go down a ballot. That's to be expected. Not generally at this level. What we'll see is in a multiple question package, we'll generally see the first question do the strongest and then a little bit of a fall off between the three, but it's generally about 2 points or 3 points. But in this case, the facilities one does not fall within the threshold that we'd recommend placing it on the ballot at this time. So to the question of what types of projects we tested a significant number of projects, including traffic signals, pedestrian paths, improvements to particular roads on a scale, once again, of 1 to 5, 1 meaning not at all important to 5 meaning very important. These were all randomized. So some folks got McDowell Road first, other folks got Fire Service Resource Building first. We're not explaining the projects. We're not giving them long form descriptions of them. What we're doing is giving them what would likely be the description you would see in a publicity pamphlet or in a listing of projects. And this isn't necessarily to decide whether or not a project really makes the grade necessarily, but really it might be just even the order in which you talk about the projects, because sometimes people will put them in budget order or they'll put them in alphabetic order. But what we find is actually there's certain projects, and you can describe the same thing a couple of different ways and have different results. And so a lot of folks would say traffic signals and traffic signal coordination is the same as traffic safety. They are just about the same, but we did see that traffic signal and signal coordination did slightly better. Street widening to remove pinch points did better than any specific mention of a street project. Of the specifically mentioned street projects, Cotton Lane did the best at 3.67, followed by Yuma Road. McDowell and Sarival were pretty close at 3.4. Anything above a 3.5 is very well regarded. It's very well received by the electorate. It is something that a large portion across multiple partisan segments want. When you get down below sort of that level, it's not, anything above a 3 is well regarded. It just doesn't have that same universal application. There's some segments that want it more than others. In this case, what we found is younger voters wanted more of these things like the pedestrian paths and several of the parks and recreation items. The Estrella Bridge, for example, 85338 had a significantly higher score for that. It was a 3.6 or 3.7 in that case. And then you can see some of the other ones that just right at 3, which meant basically the same number of folks were sort of thought it was very important versus didn't think it was important. The 3 items that didn't really meet that level was the Public Works and Staff Building, and maybe there's a different way to describe it that might improve it. Consolidated Field Operations Building, and then the fishing lake was the thing that tested the least popular of the items that we tested. So again, that's just when we listed these descriptions, we didn't give them a lot of extra clarification. If there's items on here that are very important to you, I'd recommend that if they've fallen down the level a little bit, that they might require some additional description. And the last thing that we did, and none of these descriptions should be intended to influence the outcome of the election. What all of these are is for educational purposes, to get an idea of what's motivating voters, to get an understanding of maybe why they'd vote yes or no. I hear this all the time. People say, oh, well, I live on a fixed income, or, we have taxes are too high. And so if we asked 400 people, this is a 400 sample survey, by the way. If we ask 400 people why they support something or why they don't, we would get 400 different answers. So instead what we do is we read them some statements. And that gets us an understanding of really where the most amount of agreement is. And so in this case, the 2 reasons that were the largest drivers on why people would be willing to go forward with the bond election in 2023 is because of concerns with street safety. That was by far and away the number 1 statement that we tested. And I'm going to read that one to you just because I think it's important to get an idea of what we were saying. We must continue to invest in the public safety of our community. Widening our streets, removing pinch points, and improving traffic signals will make our community safer, reduce congestion, and ensure that our first responders can be there when we need them. That was the number 1, by far and away, the largest argument of why voters would be willing to invest. The second one is growth. Goodyear is in the top 10 fastest growing cities in the nation. We need these improvements to keep up with growth and ensure that the city can continue to offer excellent amenities as our community continues to grow. Those 2 were the 2 leading factors. They are up against one that needs to be addressed, and I think you have addressed it with some of the limitations and keeping the tax rate. There is concerns about we are taxed enough already. Taxes go up, they never go down. Inflation is out of control, and we simply can't afford another tax. That's a 3.74. That scores well above the mean. There are taxation concerns at play here that people would like to, that people are feeling as they go through this. So I know that's quite a bit of information there, but I do think it's helpful as you make your decision making. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. I'm still sad about the parks. So my question is, and I totally get why you did that in the information, so it's no ding on you at all. I mean, it's very informative, and you did call just about every race correctly. So I know if we take this to this election, this is probably what we're going to see. Knowing how, I want to say almost pigeonhole that electorate is this something that might be better to take to another election, or take the parks question, if we need more later, we're going to have some set aside to take that as in another election? Do you think it would do better then?
Do I think parks would do better in 2024 than it would in 2023?
Yeah.
I think those types of offerings that appeal more to younger demographics do significantly do better in odd numbered or even numbered years, pardon me, particularly a presidential election, yes. That is my general belief.
So that might be something, because we're saving some money, Jared, right, out from this, that we could look to go out for another one. I don't know if that's how you do this. We can go out for another one, or?
Absolutely, we can go out for another election. And really, that's part of the recommendation that came from the committee, was specifically for facilities in that case, was, hey, showed a high need for this. doesn't score well on this election. So let's reserve that out of that total threshold and come back at a later date with that election. So definitely we could come back in 2024. I think maybe we would have to talk a little bit about voter fatigue if we were bringing a bond election every year. That might be a little bit difficult, but I think that's something maybe Paul can shed a little light on as well.
And I appreciate that. I guess it's in Wally's corner to go educate her neighbors a little bit more. Thank you so much. It's very interesting.
Councilmember Gillis.
Thank you. I know it's a lot of hard work. But out of everybody on my panel here, I'm a fundraiser, a political fundraiser, and have been for 25 years. So, and I mean no disrespect, but I'm not big on polls. As you can understand, I'm sure. Some people like them, some people don't. You can get a different count here, and you can get a different count here. If we were to run another poll right now, it might be different from what you're saying, correct?
95 out of 100 times, we would be within 4.9% of this survey based on these questions.
Okay, because, pardon me?
No, go ahead. Look, from a fundraising perspective, absolutely. I know how polls can absolutely impact fundraising.
And I get candidates elected, top-tier candidates.
Yes.
And so as far as the governor's election and did you call the Senate's election?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so did we. And we're not pollsters. So we called the governor's election. The attorney general's election was a little confusing to us, still is. But the Senate election we called, and like I said, we're not pollsters.
Right.
So I think it's important for us all to understand that we don't just go 100% on what a pollster says, because there could be something else out there that we're missing that we need to find out ourselves, or get a second opinion just to be sure if there's something we're not sure about. If there's something that we see that we're not okay with, I think it's something that we have to check out too. And yet I know you did a lot of work. I'm thanking you for that, because there is a lot of work that goes into that. But I also know how pollsters work. And I do know that I don't agree with a lot of what they do. I'm sorry.
So there are a lot of good pollsters out there. There are a lot of bad pollsters out there.
There are.
My goal, and if you want to read every question that we have, is to remove all bias from every question that we ask. Our goal is not to make it go one way or another. There are pollsters out there that could write a survey tomorrow that tells you that you could pass a parks bond with 75% of the vote.
Right.
You will not
We
pass a
won't.
parks bond
We
with
won't.
75% of the vote.
I would like to see your questions.
Please
Do you
do.
have
Yeah,
those?
absolutely.
Can you make sure I get those, Jared? I'd like to see them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. I
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Vice Mayor.
There's so much that goes into this, my goodness. I had the unique opportunity to run into a man and woman who both were polled. They talked to the wife first, and then as soon as she hung up, the husband got the call.
That's great.
And so it was the February one, so it was very long. And they leaned towards no on a lot because there was only very limited information given to them. For example, the Regional Training Center. Yes, they support public safety, but they wanted elaboration on what that was, what did it mean, and of course, in a poll, apparently that it doesn't go that way. The facilities, they talked about how, well, we just built the Goodyear Rec Campus, you just built City Hall, so what else do you need? And so it is hard when you're only giving them limited information. And so I had an opportunity to talk with Doug a little bit about this, because this whole process is just very complex and certainly very layered. And as far as your credentials, I mean, you've been in this business for a long time, and I know you've got an excellent reputation. So it's just been I think when I did read the poll questions, because Jared sent them out last week, and covered a lot of ground. Definitely a lot of topics that were covered. Question about timing, which I think is really good. I understand that there's 2 school districts going out in November of '23. Would us going out at the same time potentially have a negative impact on them, or would theirs have a negative impact on us?
Certainly could be the case if you've got multiple tax issues on the ballot, especially if you were to ask all 4. And so it's a 6-question ballot for a voter, say, in both the Agua Fria and Litchfield district, or in that case, in Agua Fria and Avondale. Certainly could have some voter fatigue there based on also the ticket sizes. I don't know exactly what amounts each one of those groups is going to go out with. But what you'll see is there will be likely some negotiation with voters. What they'll do is they'll pick and choose which ones they want versus which ones they don't. You generally see if they ask multiple questions, they often will get one but not both. So there's a little bit of that. In this case, I believe the city's questions would be asked first because you'd be going to a broader audience. So likely 1, 2, or 3, 4 questions, however many you asked, would be the first ones that asked, and then the local schools would be listed after that. So the fall off would probably be in that direction based on sort of historic participation patterns, yes.
Which is hard because I know you've been a big advocate of school bonds, and you know, it just seems like we're all getting in the arena at the same time. Definitely a challenge. And with the questions and the that we'll be asking, are they specific enough? I know you don't want to be too specific because you can pigeonhole yourself into certain topics, but are they specific enough to defend against any allegation? We're just asking for a blank check. You know, we just want 95 million for streets, and we're not.
So the ballot language itself has the prescribed language that you have to use when it comes to construct, design, and all that, and then that's where the publicity pamphlet comes in. We tested that randomized rotated list of projects because that's likely what a voter would see. I mean, if we could sit down with every voter and explain to them all of the different needs, all 100,000, I mean, we certainly would have different results when it comes to this. But what we're replicating is if someone were to show up with what we expect to be a reasonable amount of information, where would they start looking? That's why we start with a pre-test to get an understanding where they start. And then what we see is over the course of the survey, when we describe the projects, when we get to the bottom and they can see what's more in it, we see the post-test that we actually improved the numbers over the course of the survey because they had a little bit more education. One of the big takeaways that I did share with the committee themselves was this will require significant public information and public education because voters they don't have that information unless you give that to them. They don't know what that facility means unless it's described to them. They won't, all we can do is if they read a list, our best goal is, and one of your best tools is your publicity pamphlet. The most voters, particularly in an audience like this, will read your publicity pamphlet cover to cover. So putting frequently asked questions in there, putting descriptions in there, putting in the time to have a detailed publicity pamphlet is worth your while because that will be where most of the voters will get their information.
Okay.
More specifically on those questions. So we had questions drafted by our bond counsel based on previous bond elections that we had many years ago and things that have been learned over the last 20 years since that last election. And we took that to the committee, and the committee really had some issues with some of them being too broad, but more specifically, there was some language for facilities or infrastructure that we did not talk about. So on the public safety, for instance, we had fire stations listed, we had police substations listed. And when we talked with the committee about it, those two pieces of infrastructure, we specifically said that wouldn't be something we would be getting from a general obligation bond. We have other sources, development impact fees for those. So they, in their recommendation, removed those pieces of infrastructure because they wanted to make sure that any educational outreach efforts that they make is based off of what they've learned through their committee meetings and the discussions that we had there. So we didn't want to have anything contrary to what they had heard at that time, but we still have it broad enough to give us flexibility because some of the bonds that we issued last year were from 1988. So some of the bond authorization, the voter authorization may live for a decade or two. So we need to give ourselves some flexibility as things change, priorities change, funding changes as we go along.
So the last bond actually covered about 2 decades, and this new bond is likely to be a shorter period than it would seem.
The plan is, with the committee's recommendation, we're looking at a 5-year window is what we're looking at. And I believe what I presented last week, I showed 3 issuances of 3 separate bonds over a 5-year period. So the intention would be that we would do this in 5 years.
Okay. Last question, you'll be covering the 40 million set aside later on in this presentation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gillis?
100% publicity, 100%. That is where they really read and find out. You and I agree on that, 100%. Yay. I didn't get what these guys got, or I passed it over, so I really do need it. I'd like to look at the questions.
We'll make sure you get
Thank
a
you.
copy of it.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add before we go on, very good, great discussion, is, it's amazing not only when you do the election, because when I looked at our election in August, I wasn't really surprised, but 20% of the people were 50 and under that voted, and 80% were over 50. Now, when you went to November, which our election for council was settled in August, so what happened for those that wanted to wait till November to vote, which boosted a little bit, they were already too late because our election was settled. So I think it also depends on when it's going to be. If some think it's a primary, they just wait to the November, and council races, for the most part, get settled in the August election. So yeah, has a lot to do with when you're putting it on and who's showing up for vote, and that has a lot to do with it. So, and I appreciate the information with all this. So, and I'm happy to hear that they at least like what we're doing. That's nice.
Very much so.
You got something else? Go ahead.
Just going to continue through the presentation. We have a few more slides to go through. Just touching back on the recommendation from the bond committee, $192 million in total. And we're going to talk right now about the $40 million reserved for a future election. So the part of the recommendation was that, well, it was not recommending anything for the facilities category because of what we had seen in the survey. Poor results. Specifically, we were looking at the Municipal Operations Center in the next 5 years, looking for funding for that. Tested 2 ways. Neither one of those broke the 3.0 mean. Additionally, I believe you had seen the facilities master plan, and then we saw it 10 days later. The scope for the actual Municipal Operations Center wasn't quite to the point where the committee felt good about going out with educational outreach on that project yet. They knew that we are including something in the tentative budget coming up next week to do some planning and some design on that, and hopefully that will be more baked in time for a future election. But I think the thing we want to talk about tonight is that recommendation that they gave actually took $40 million out of the total 232 and set that aside for a future election.
I've got a question. Go ahead, Vicki.
Per bill, though, in the last meeting, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong, that wasn't set aside. We don't have that money set aside, as Bill said. That's money you're going to come back and get from us, correct? So it's not money like it's in an account ready to go. We have to come up with that money in another budget cycle.
Correct. And actually for...
Because that's a little bit that's misleading a little
Yeah,
bit.
for this, it's actually, we would have to come back and do an election to get voter authorization of
Yeah.
$40 million.
So let's use different terminology. I don't like set aside, because set aside sounds like, and Bill said this last week, it sounds like there's a fund here and we've got the money, when in fact, it's going to come back to us and we've got to go to Wynette for her budget. And then Wynette's got to come up with that. So we don't want to blame Wynette. Do you see what I'm saying? Because the money was supposed to be set aside and people are going to say, where's the money, Wynette? You know, set aside means set aside, okay? This is not set aside. This is money you're going to have to come back and ask us for again, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so let's use different terminology, okay?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So my question is, do we have to agree with the amount of bonding the committee has come up with?
No, you do not. You do not.
Why haven't we asked this question before? Why are we just going on like the amount they say is what we have to do?
At the last presentation, we were just presenting their recommendation to you,
Right.
is what we were doing. And today is really where we're having this discussion of whether we're going to go forward with the same amount that was recommended, or if we're going to give staff direction to go a different direction on this.
Okay, so is the recommendation 284 or 232?
So the recommendation is $192 million.
192, okay. What's the max we can do?
$232 million if we want to keep the property
At
tax.
174,
You got it.
okay. So, and the 40 million that we would have to come up with would only be to plan and design the building. It's, of course, not enough money to fund the building, let alone buy it and build it.
Correct. The amount that was included in the budget was $2 million for the design and planning of the project. It's estimated at $40 million for the construction.
40 for construction and 2 million to plan it?
And design.
And so we're only going to come back for 40 million. We'll have to come back for more than that, will we not?
The intention is we'd come back for $40 million for the construction of the project.
The building and the planning and the design?
Is just, the $40 million is just the construction of the building.
And who's going to plan it and design it?
So we've included that amount in the tentative budget for
Of the 232?
2024.
Of the 192?
It is.
Oh, no, in the budget.
It is,
Okay,
yep, it is
got
completely separate
Okay.
from, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Go on.
Just to go through public safety, $80 million in total, 2 projects listed there. The fire resource management facility exceeds the 3.5. The public safety training facility was right at the 3.5 mark. Within transportation, as Paul had mentioned, there were quite a few different questions that were asked, specific projects that exceeded the 3.5, Yuma and Cotton, but a lot of other topics, traffic signal and signal coordination, traffic safety improvements, those larger ideas about transportation scored very well in the survey. Ballot questions, I think we covered this already, talking about the ballot questions that were recommended by the committee. And finally, we'll land here on this slide for direction from council on the call for election for next week. This is the recommendation that came forward from the committee.
So Mayor, I have another question. So we're already talking about improvements to Cotton Lane, to Yuma, and McDowell, Camelback. And we're spending money now, we're doing things now. So how does that play into what they think we're going to do additional?
Well, you don't have any capacity right now, 0, okay? You've spent it all. This should have been done, in my view, several years ago, because we actually clear through all our capacity. So we hire a bond committee, we ask them to make us recommendations and going for it, and if we want more or less, that's one thing. But from my perspective, I think we ought to go, since we asked the bond committee on what their recommendations would be on projects, I think we ought to stick with that.
Oh, well, I'm not debating that. What I wanted to know is, we're working now on fixing some of those roads. We're spending money right now out of this budget or next year's budget on these roads. Where does that play into the general obligation bonds that we're going to tell them that we're going to redo the Cotton Lane and we're going to redo this road? We're already doing them.
Well, let's get clarification from Jared on that. On when you're talking about these particular projects here, what they're working on right now, is this money already in the budget or not in the budget?
The money is
It's
not
not.
in the budget.
That's what I thought.
There's a list that was included in that recommendation that was 6 total projects, including Yuma, Cotton Lane to Canyon Trails, Camelback Road, Citrus to Cotton, Indian School, Perryville to Citrus, Indian School, Citrus to Minnesota, Cotton Lane Estrella to Cotton Lane Bridge, and McDowell Road, Litchfield to Dysart. Now, the other thing, these were based on the preliminary findings from the Transportation Master Plan that isn't going to be finalized until December, which is, kind of goes back to the ballot question and why we don't specifically say in there that we want to build these 6
Right, good,
projects.
yeah.
Because we know that when we have the finalized transportation plan, these priorities may change a little bit based on the new information that we have. Additionally, we may find other funding sources for 1 or 2 of these projects on here, but we will have other priorities coming forward from the Transportation Master Plan.
Okay, thank you.
Good? Mm-hmm. All right. You got a question? Go ahead.
Okay, I'm still trying to reconcile that 40 million. We have a capacity to ask for another 40 million, but we have decided to defer it to a future election. And is that a strategic plan so we have a better plan to present to the public? Or can you just help me understand why we're deferring the capacity that we could ask for now?
So part of the issue for the committee was that they could only make a recommendation for a single election. They weren't looking outside of anything except a 2023, November 2023 election. However, they did see a very big need for facilities, specifically the Municipal Operations Center. And the way they felt that they could make inroads there is by making a recommendation less than the total amount that would leave an amount available for future election for voter authorization.
But if it's not successful now, what would change to make it successful in the future?
That's a great question. One of the things that if Paul was here, he would say that potentially in 2024, that mix of the electorate would be different, and that this would score better in 2024 than it would in 2023. But based on the information that we saw from the tests that we did, that's a lot of percentage you're going to have to make up from 2023 to 2024. So we'll have some challenges probably with a facilities question even in the future.
All right, are we leaving money on the table then that we could use for something else? Because I understood for streets that it polled higher, that you could actually spend more than 95 million.
Yeah, and actually in the original questions, we asked a $150 million question for transportation, and it actually scored well even at the $150 million amount.
Okay. It just seems that maybe 95 isn't enough in today's economy to do everything we need to do. Again, just concerned about, are we leaving money on the table that we could use somewhere else?
The other thing I'll say is the graph that I show you that gets us the calculation of $232 million. When I do that again next year, that number is going to change and likely will increase if our valuation increases. So we're kind of constrained by that forecast that we need to use based on the state statute. So as we go forward, it's likely we will see more authorization available in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
I think she had hers first.
You got another question?
I don't care. I have a statement. That's why the 40 million we can't say we put it aside. That's misleading to the public. Exactly what Laura just said. 100%. We can't put it there because it's not money that's there. We can't say that.
Go ahead.
I guess the question would be, would it be better than, rather than the voter fatigue, to put the, like, transportation to raise that, or would that not test well? Because I get the whole election cycle. I was involved with several of our local school board, or it's not school, local school district elections off cycle, and they're really hard to pass when you're asking for money off cycle. I get that. So would it be better to up the transportation, and then we'd have more CIP money than to go to parks, since that's obviously not going to pass with this electorate? I'm not sure how we can fit these pieces together to get down the road where we need to go. No pun intended with transportation. But I don't know if we need to go a little higher there, and then that frees up other resources.
Absolutely. I think we know, based on the survey that we did, the poll that we did, transportation scored well even at $150 million. So we know that it still scores well at the higher dollar amount. The types of things you're talking about, if we have this funding available for transportation, would that free up potentially other dollars within the CIP? I would say it would. It would likely would. And again, council would be able to set those priorities annually with the budget. So you would still have that ability to do that.
So I guess the question on the table is, do you want to add the 40 to the 95? I think so. Well, let's go around the table there. Councilmember Hampton?
There we go.
I mean, it sounded like
Well,
from Paul's presentation that that's not gonna, the facilities is not gonna
Well, it won't say facilities, though.
It'll be transportation.
It'll be
put under transportation.
It's adding 40 more.
With the slide that I have on the screen, that would take transportation from 95 up to $135 million.
135. And he said the 150, that there was support for it, or 150 million for transportation.
Was there support with that question?
In the February opinion poll, the question was $150 million, and we still had support for transportation at $150 million.
Paul's, well,
Yeah, if we can, I like to maximize it within reason. So, I mean, if we can get the most out of it in the vote and we think it can legitimately pass, then yeah, I'm on board with as much as possible, so.
with transportation was the number one problem we're having out there right now, right? Number one, and this gives us the authority to spend the money if it's adopted by the voters, okay? It's not you're gonna spend 143, but you got the authority there. Right now,
Yeah,
we don't have any
pass.
money for transportation.
Yeah.
So if you can get this to pass at 135 million, then at least you have some additional money when we need the road improvements, especially if 400E falls apart.
Yeah.
And we need some more road improvements that
I think one bridge is 100
Yeah,
million,
so-
right, Estrella?
So, I mean, add the capacity instead of trying again a second shot, since transportation is number one, and that's what I'm hearing out there is congestion and lighting and moving around the city. You know, I don't, you know, I guess the question is, do you think the 40 on top of the 95 for transportation will make it? And if you guys feel comfortable with that, because like I say, that 135 million in transportation with roads and street isn't a whole lot of money.
Not in today's,
Not in today's money and stay standard with construction and all that.
yeah. And you said that it did at 150.
Yeah. Poll will. So,
That is correct.
so, yeah, go ahead, what you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. If it will pass, then that frees up other money for other, oh, I am so sorry.
None of us are using it. Up higher.
Okay, you have to be smarter than it's operated. Clearly, I'm not. There we go.
We did not have that in the, I don't think we had that in the bond ballot question. Apologize.
I think that's a good plan, and then that would free up capacity in other areas of the budget to reach some of these other goals that we might have, whether it be parks or facilities or whatever we need. We would free up more for our CIP or more for public safety or whatever comes down the pike. I think we have that, like the mayor said, we have the capacity, don't have to spend it. It took us how many years to spend the other?
We were spending $1988
Okay.
the last time we issued, so it was
Yeah.
over 20.
So if it
was over
takes us
30.
more than 5 years, that's okay, right?
Correct.
Okay, so this is a forever capacity, so we don't have to spend it within that period. It's just kind of a guideline for our
Correct.
needs.
That was the guidance we gave to the committee, so that was, the recommendation was based off of that. That
Yeah,
the-
and I
the
can tell
council
you-
can decide to do
Oh, sorry.
whatever you would like to do.
And I can see, I agree, that's one thing that everybody seems to say. Whenever there's driving around the city, that is the number one complaint. So I'm for, let's add that on and see what we got.
Then there's no confusion to come back for the 40 million, which
That's
is
correct.
what I'm again. Yeah, that's what I would
Are we
prefer
hearing
also.
consensus here?
So whether we go out for 192 or 232, the tax rate is still 174.
Yeah,
That is correct.
That doesn't change.
Okay, I think we should go for the
Yes,
max.
I agree.
All right, I think we have the direction that we need. We will be back next week with the call for election. We'll update our documents to bring that back to you.
Perfect,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. With that, with no further item to discuss, we will adjourn the work session and head right to the interspecial meeting.